So yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started? Why don't you maybe to start us off, if you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know Sia.
Yes, so my name is Hangē from Uhila, Angilau. I'm married to Tony Angilau from Angilau. I come from a little village in the eastern side, Talanoa. It's known to be where the pigs go fishing. So we live on one side of the road and the ocean is on one side of the main road. I think that's one thing I've always loved about that. The small community. Um, my father is, we have my family Uhila, he's already passed on back in 2011. My mom is still alive. I have two brothers. I don't have a sister. I'm the eldest of our children, which comes with a lot of responsibility. I think that's a little bit about myself and my family. I have a daughter who's in the first grade, Marianne. Because I know if she sees this, she'll be like, "Why didn't you mention me?" So I have a daughter, Marianne Grace Angilau. That's a bit about my family. I write for a living. First, it was a hobby, and I do it now for a living. I run a little business called Grace Consultancy, and I'm involved a lot in community work and so many other things.
So maybe just kind of building off of that, and I think the question that Kay asked last week, what inspired you to start writing, to start telling other stories?
Well, the writing I feel is a family legacy. My maternal grandmother kept journals. Journal writing was a thing for her. She taught my mother. My mother taught my father, and so they kept journals. From the day I was born, there was a journal entry of mine written by my mom all the way until I was 8 years old, and then she was like, "Oh, you need to start writing." So the writing, I feel, has always been part of my whole life in my family. The fact that I write about others, I think I discovered early from my father the joy of service and helping people. And just when I read the journal entries, it's just much more colorful when there's like these characters and memorable people mentioned in there. And so that just naturally came to me in my writing as well. It was always about writing about me, about people. Today I went here, I met Nike and and we talked about this. And so having others there has always been something. The transition went from writing on the journal to online because in 2015 I thought I need a new hobby, need to learn something new, and journal writing was because I was getting busier and busier by the day, and I didn't have a lot of time to write. So I thought I need to type. I sent myself emails of my journal entries, and then I one day in 2015, early in 2015, I was just looking online for Tonga, and most of the stuff that I found written about Tonga were from the Peace Corps. I have here the very thing that I wrote that year when I started blogging. It said, so I've started blogging this 2015. I was so bored and was inspired by stories of Peace Corps volunteers. Then I decided it's about time I develop a new hobby. By new hobby meaning I had to Google how to start a blog online, do all those things, and do one that's free. And then I wrote a blog called My Ordinary Tongan Life. And so I wrote about more of like I did my journal, but it was now you feel like you're writing to an audience. And so I wrote a blog 2015, and in that blog I highlighted people. I know the late Polikefu was part of that. I did one of a disability named Akulina. I did one on Honorable Jenny Salesa in New Zealand, Charles Piltau, that rugby player. And it was people that I came across over the course of my meetings or whatever it was, things that they did, that said, that inspired me. And then I told those things in that blog. When I became a mother, I had no idea how busy that was. And I couldn't go back to doing the writing like I did. So I stopped. 2019, my love for writing came back. I wanted to do it again. So I restarted a blog named My Ordinary Tongan Life once again, but a different website. And when I wrote, the women were like, "See, how do we get to your blog? It sounds so interesting, but we don't know how." I'm like, "You just click on the link that I have on the post." They're like, "There's too much work for us. Why don't you just write on social media?" That scared me, because I saw it as a place of negativity. Everyone was there. Everyone can say something. They can come swear at the post. All those things. You have a little bit more control on the blog. I felt like social media is like out there, and I panicked.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to. But I had a family tragedy that really pushed me. The courage to step forward was after that family tragedy, because I thought, if I had gone through and made it through, I feel like I can deal with whatever people say. So I started doing Ordinary Tongan Lives on Facebook, where most Tongans were.
Yeah.
And then I wrote, and I think all my fears just went away because people just appreciated the stories for what they were, and the people in it. And instead of saying my ordinary Tongan lives, it was then Ordinary Tongan Lives, because I just wanted to make it about other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think it shot up in popularity so much? So I think you have like 50,000 followers on Facebook and 10,000 on Instagram now.
Yeah. I think, from the reviews, I went back and reviewed the page and what people were commenting, and from what the fans have been telling me in the past, 3 things stood out. One, the stories were raw, they were real and authentic, and they were relatable, That's the main thing. And the second thing is, for many, it reflected Tongan heroes and Tongan values. It's different to read about New York and watch the movies about India and all. It's different when it's your own, it just hits differently. And for people, they say it reminded them of Christian core values and morals. It gave ordinary people a voice, Most of these ordinary people, you just read them on the news when they die or when they committed a crime or something, But it gave them to say about their ordinary everyday lives, what they do for a living, It reminded Tongans of their roots. Many of them have been away from Tonga for so long, and they've gotten kind of forgotten. Or people who are social media, they project a different profile from what they really are in person. And I think it just reminded them of who they really are and where they began from, their roots. And lastly, the Tongans overseas, there was a sense of connection. And I think because of there's a connection to Tonga. And I started in 2019, 2020 lockdown happened. And I think the popularity grew because they wanted to know about their families here in Tonga. And the page was so random. You never know, your mother could come out tomorrow, It could be your grandma, because I pick people randomly to highlight. So I think that's why it was popular. For me personally, I felt that my belief of human beings and people was right from the very beginning. I believe people had a tendency to like doing good than doing bad. They have they want to improve. They live life not knowing about what the others are going through, and they would very much like to know, but don't know how to approach. And I think generally people want to help. They want to make a difference, and I felt like the stories were able to make that shine through the lessons and the stories that were told. I think that's why it was. That's what I think was popular. In addition to what people tell me.
When you started off, did you intend to choose to kind of select the ordinary people? And I know the name of it was Ordinary Tongan Lives. Was that always the intention?
Oh yes, that was always. This book here is how I planned to start Ordinary. I had a vision. I had mission statement. I had values. I had goals. And because my blog was my ordinary, because I thought I'm just an ordinary person, and I just thought I'd rather highlight ordinary people and ordinary experiences. I don't want to start with the prime minister. I don't want to start with the sports stars, because you've already read about them. Why do I need? What can I add? I feel like I would add more value if I bring the voices of the people that have not had that opportunity. Do you really have to be selected as a leader of the country to make it to
Mhm.
be marked as important.
Yeah.
No, the fact that you were born a person
Mhm.
and a human being, that's important. So I wanted to add value to that space of in terms of writing, and it has always been about ordinary people. It's funny, like sometimes I write people and people are like, "That's not ordinary. The person is extraordinary." But in a
Yeah.
Tongan sense,
Yeah, in
you
a Tongan
never
sense.
go as a Tongan and say,
Yeah.
"I am this extraordinary human being." It's just not Tongan. Eh? The
Mhm.
fact of whakaagi mui and like more like being modest and being humble about it. You see
Yeah.
the Tongans driving how many vehicles, and they're like, we only have this one, one poor car that we drive around,
Mhm.
but in fact they have 10. They
Yeah.
live in a mansion, and they'll still say we have this, modest
This tiny
accommodation or tiny house. That's
Mhm.
Tongan.
Mhm.
And so in my
And
page,
material
it reflects
things.
it.
Mhm.
And people like it that way, that they're like, yeah, I'm ordinary. But when you hear the story, it's like, you're not ordinary, you're extraordinary. Yeah? So it was from the get-go, and even now, it was always to be ordinary people.
And I think I
Yeah.
often see it on comments of those living overseas,
Mm.
how most of them, born and raised there, didn't know what their ancestors went through to get
Yeah.
there, and reading it makes it real.
Yeah.
Like, so the struggles,
Yeah.
the real struggle,
Yeah,
how one person started from nothing
yeah,
and then ended up having kids, grandchildren,
Yeah.
which, they're very successful
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I saw that
Mhm.
connections in there, like what you say about those international.
I think it was always also surprising for the Tongans overseas, because they grew up hearing it from their parents, from their grandparents, how life was like back in the island. For some of them, they're like, oh, it's very much a reality right now. They thought that was over in the, last decade or so. But to see that the everyday lives of the people was very much the stories that their grandparent or their parents had told them, it's like, it's humbling, it's really
It is.
humbling. And to think that's like, man, this is what my grandparent had to go through to get me here to America, to have this kind of
Mhm.
opportunity,
Yeah.
And so for a lot of Tongans, that has been a feeling. Yeah.
Would you say with your audience, do you
Yeah.
have a larger amount that's coming from the diaspora
Yeah.
that's observing these or reading these stories online?
Yeah. And in the beginning, it was more of people from the diaspora. It was the page was more popular overseas than here in Tonga.
Mhm.
The Tongans here were busy trying to think who is writing
Who
this
is writing
page,
this?
determining the credibility
Yeah.
of the page.
Mhm.
And I didn't even introduce myself. I just did the story. It was like story after story after story, and I never said anything about who was behind it. I just left it to people's assumptions, because I was so shy to come out and say, like, I do this because we're like, who are you? What have you done? Yeah. So in terms, to come back to what you said, in the beginning, it was overseas. They were the ones that were like, because they were excited to learn about here in Tonga. But over time, now it's more Tongans in Tonga than overseas. But when you have the whole thing combined, the Tongans overseas always exceed the ones over here. I looked at my analytics, and it's about so the countries, Tonga is about like 10,000 or so, but then the combination of all the other countries would be like 30,000, 40,000 or something like that. So
Yeah, that's very interesting.
yeah.
But as you're like giving people a platform to tell their story, you're telling their story, and it's being, I mean, your own fear of getting on social media
Yeah.
and telling these stories to a wider audience. When you are talking to people initially, is there hesitation? Do they know
Yeah.
when you're going through that
Yeah,
this
yeah,
could
yeah.
end up on Facebook and there's
Yeah.
going to be this many people possibly
Yes.
looking at it?
So as I said in my plan, I wanted to make sure that the values of my storytelling would include that of integrity, of transparency, of being accountable to the things I tell. Those were things I predetermined before I went out, because I was so scared of what would happen with social media that I had to plan that very well, and I had principles, regardless of who I tell the story. the person is of importance, you know. Whether you are an ex-convict or or a former prime minister, you will be treated the same, you know. Because in here, I remember I said there would be no discrimination, you know. There would be, you know, I had all these things. See, no judgment or discrimination. It had to bring results, you know. If I tell a story, it had to have results on people, you know. Respect, trust, integrity, and that included letting people know where their stories are gonna go, what's gonna be done with it, you know. So before I start a story, I always tell people, if I tell this story, it's gonna be on Facebook. That's one. And then I also hope in the long run to do a book, you know. So there's a likeliness that I would like to also publish your story in a book if I get that opportunity. This is talking with me having no idea how to publish a book, all those things, but I had wanted to be as honest and transparent as possible, and I think that was crucial, you know. And I feel like it's a gift when I talk to people that within 5 minutes
You connect.
I can get a person to have all the guards down, you know, walls are down, the barriers are down, and even that I still need to not be taking advantage of that. So towards the end of our interview and all, I say, you have shared some very vulnerable and sensitive things, you know. There's certain things that you shared that you feel that I shouldn't write or mention, and then they'd be like, yeah, actually, can you not write this part out? Or I feel like that's part of the integrity of me as a storyteller. Of, you know, I can't take advantage of it if they say, you know. And I've had stories where I've told it and people change their mind and they're like writing. They're like, oh, it's this part, you know. I'm like, oh, that's fine. I'll just delete it. And then all of a sudden you see 2 story parts, and then the next day you come, there's only 1 part. It's because of that, you know. I made sure that people knew, and I think that came through in the storytelling, and that encouraged more people because there was trust, even from people I've never met, that when I will take their story, I'll make something good out of it, you know, regardless of how painful your experience was, regardless of whether you actually served in jail for like 14 years, there's something good to be gotten out of it, even when the situation seems bad.
But I think, yeah, that we had this one conversation before, and you mentioned that. How you always get back to them, and you know, you record it, and then you go home, and then you transcribe it, and then you go over it, and you feel like, oh, this is very personal. So you call them back and ask about it, and I think respecting them and their space is a really good thing. And I also like, you know, we say like you write their stories, you tell their stories. But in your writing, it's first person account. Like you translate it in a way like as if it's that person telling the story. So I know it's a lot of work.
It is.
Like to record, to transcribe, to select which one, and then translate. And it's like it's so accurate. Like the translation, I've seen the comments from others saying like it's on point. They're like, oh, who's writing this? Are they writing their own story in English? So salute to that.
I remember one time, because you know, this was a time that people didn't know who was writing, and I wrote this story of a guy that was selling brooms by the roadside, and he was saying in his story that he quit school in primary school, you know, so because he thought he wasn't really smart at all. And the Tongans were like, that's funny, you didn't finish class 6, but your English is so good. You know? They didn't get it, that there's another person writing it, you know. And I think that drove me to actually come out and write that this is the page, I'm the one who's doing the story. It actually, you know, I had to come out and do that so people can understand there's actually a person. But my goal is to be like that, to make you feel that I don't exist, you know, that you're just meeting the person one-on-one, like I did, you know. And that's why I wanted it to be left in first person. The thing is, I would structure what they say and put it, but I try to stay as close as possible to exactly what they said, you know, because in my mind I'm thinking, what if that person choose me because I put words in their mouth? So I try to stay true as possible to what they say, and what I have, and just organize it in a way that would have, that would be coherent and that it would make sense. Sorry. Was that your question?
Yeah. Well, I think yeah. No. Well, I think I was wondering too. Is like the with people being pretty humble, but also just maybe worried, embarrassed to be on Facebook, right, in front of everyone and have their life story told. Like, from our perspective, as fans of Ordinary Tongan Lives, it's amazing. It's really interesting storytelling. But I imagine, for someone's story being told, they might be a little, intimidated by that. And I'm wondering, how has that worked out, and how have you, what are you doing? What do you do to get people to drop their guards and tell their story and to be vulnerable and to open up to you? You had mentioned that earlier, your ability to get that to happen. What do you think you're doing?
Yeah, I think it comes from an understanding of just what a Tongan is, understanding of our culture, our value, where we come from, what makes us the more similar than different as people. And I think that's what happened, because when I was young, I would talk to my uncle, I would talk to, I would walk on the road. I used to be smacked by my mom for making it late, in the evening, because I would be talking stories with people who were so much older than me. So from my young age, I felt like that was part of my training as a storyteller, because I knew how to interact with people from all kinds of, of backgrounds and all that. In terms of the Tongan, because I just understand how Tongans are, how modest they are. And I think that's why, for a lot of Tongans, that's why they were surprised that such a page can do that with the Tongans, because most Tongans would not want to share that, Even some people, they're like, man, my children wrote, and you're like, you got so vulnerable, we didn't know you'd be able to do that. And you're like, yeah, it's you. But I think for me, I pray a lot, if I can share that. I pray a lot about the people I talk with, who to talk to, how to talk to them, because even though we're more alike than we're different, we're also very unique in the way you're dressed. So I don't approach you the same way I do Wake or anyone else. There's a certain way, and you always start, when you go to people, you start with what is easy, what they can handle, I'd come and I'd compliment you on your shirt, and very soon you'll be talking to me about so many things that you're comfortable with. And then all of a sudden, you just don't know. The questions get more and more, it gets deeper and it gets more and more personal. And I think it also comes from me as a person, I have to, not only in the way I speak to you, but you also have to feel from me that you can trust me, enough to be able to let down your guard, And I feel that at that time, in that vulnerability, I have to be extremely careful with that, not to make to use that to my advantage or for anything. And my motives have to be pure, my purpose has to be right, and handling that vulnerability at that time is crucial. And I think as a person there who's so talkative, so opinionated, talking to people makes me zip my mouth 90% of the time. So I just listen, and then I was like, okay. I've heard some people that are like, why we keep telling you stuff that makes us cry? I'm like, why? Because when we tell you stuff that we expect you to be alarmed, to be angry or react, you're just like, yeah, and and like it's just normal, So I think it's more of handling people that way.
You were talking about your ability to kind of work with people and tell their stories, and the power of just kind of the conversation and the dialogue, allowing people to open up more. How do you see storytelling fit in Tongan culture and Tongan cultural preservation or empowerment of the culture through you telling these stories about people?
Feel free to add on to this as well.
Yes, Kay, you're
along the
very
way.
much welcome to join.
I would like to think that the art of storytelling is as old as the human existence, you know. And for the Tongan context, that same way, I feel like wherever down the road where we were determined as Tongans, there was storytelling. And in Tonga, we know from our culture, from our traditions, that we have had certain aspects of storytelling, mostly oral. You know, we've had our myths passed down. That's why we still know about Talanoa and Aetu and Maui and all these people that we've never met. You know, we have the myths, we have our designs. You know, we have our ngatu designs, the tapa designs, the patterns of our weaving. Those carry stories with them. You know, the tattoos, even though it was taboo in the Christian missionary era, we had the tattoos. That was part of our history. That was part of our storytelling as Tongans. But what I've found, yes, dancing. In the punakes, we have our punakes as poets, as, you know, songwriters, the singing, you know. So I feel like storytelling has always been with us as a people, and not only as Tongans, but everywhere else. You know, it has always been part of the human experience. What I found from teaching was we had students who are very weak in writing. You know, they are skilled storytellers. My uncle is so good at you know, doing it. Whether it's true or not, that's another thing. But the fact that it's Malia, you know, that Talanoa Malia is always there in the Tongan audiences, at a funeral, at a wedding, you know, wherever. It's those stories. The difference that I found that I offered was I would have my uncle tell the stories. I would go home and write it down in my journal. See, now my uncle has died, Sione, my uncle has died. I tell a lot more of his stories than his children because I had recorded stuff, you know, and I saw in my students a weakness for writing, but it was something that I loved, okay? And I think in terms of the Tongan culture, that's something that we need more and more for people to be able to document the beautiful things about us, about our people, about our culture, about the way we live. It is a wonderful way of preserving our history. I feel like we would have had one consistent understanding of Tangaloa. Should have someone, or Tangaloa himself, wrote down a journal and passed it down, you know. But because it was preserved orally, we have different versions, you know, and then we have theories, and then we have all these things that people interpret because our context is so different from back then, you know. But I feel with writing, you can preserve things as they are, and I'm grateful for the Palangis and foreigners in that way. They had captured part of our written history, you know, but it's not complete. And so in terms of our culture, like I said, when I was inspired by the Peace Corps, I read what they wrote about Tonga, and I read about their experiences in the villages. But I also understood from what they were writing that they were missing parts of it, you know, because there is an aspect of the Tongan culture that's so complex that you'd spend years with the Tongan and still not get it because it's not written, you know. It's like the unwritten order of things. And I felt that's what I can provide as a Tongan writer to a culture. I can read the unwritten order of things, you know. Whereas a Palangi can come and like listen to the people and do their research and find out what's written and still not get it. I get it because I'm Tongan, you know. I get the sarcasm, you know. I get it when they're like, "You're not needed here," you know. Things that an outsider would not pick up, I would, you know. And I think for that. It is a value I can add to the Tongans and to our people, and to preserve those legacies, you know. Storytelling would mean that you preserve the values of your family, of our people, of our culture through storytelling or through writing, especially of those stories, you know, documenting. You preserve your history, you know. When people pass on, you have something to hold on to, you know. Not just the souvenirs, but the stories associated with those things, because it makes it more meaningful. Your grandfather is not just a picture, you know. He had a full life. He had adversity that he had to go through, you know. That just adds richness to life of a person and all, you know. My friends, my group of close friends, we have a group chat. And my name there on the group chat is death by interview. Because they say that the people I interview die. That's not true of the majority, but it's because when those people had gone on, I feel so good that there is something that that their children can hold on to. There's a part in their life that I've captured part of that journey. Eh? We've just lost a man in our neighborhood, and my mom keeps saying, had you gone and done his story like I asked you to, we would have had our picture, we would have had, and I think that's a value that can be added by storytellers to the Tongan context and culture.
We not only tell good stories, but we would love to hear a good story also. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like real.
Yeah.
We just, like,
it just has to be Mali, and then makes you fun. I feel like those are Tongan aspects of a story that's really good. It has to be Mali, it has to be warm, mafana. It has to ignite something in you, and then it has to maintain your attention, which is what Mali is like. It captures you,
It's funny how you were sharing about when you were teaching. Had the same experience writing, teaching creative writing, and it took forever. You go around and you see this one, like 5 minutes, nothing, 10 minutes, nothing, and then you go like, okay, so do you ever tell lies? And they're like, that's creative. Okay, tell me a good story. Just make it up right now on the spot. They tell you a really good story, but they couldn't write it. So, like right now with that, like we're often like passing history down from our ancestors, but right now, like I think it's important that you capture those moments, because we need more Tongan writers to write Tongan books, Tongan stories, and have have it in our schools so they can read it, because we don't have them resources.
It's
right
different.
now.
It's just different when it's your own, when the heroes are like your neighborhood, it's like, this is the man I went fishing. I caught fish from this man, It's different in that way. There's a certain kind of mafana, as I had said before, and in terms of, it's funny when you mention that, a memory that comes to me when I wrote my journals. Even though I was single, even though I was young, I had this sense I'm gonna die soon. So in my journal, I was writing every day like it was going to be my last, and I had wanted for me to be remembered this way, And even when I wasn't even married, I wrote with a child in mind, I wrote with a child in mind. It's like, what if I had a child who would go through dating? I need her to know this is what dating feels like. It's so frustrating. All that in mind. It's funny to look back now, but now to see that what I have done for myself and for my life can be done for others as well. It's much more rewarding. And seeing that can contribute in a way to our people, to the Tongan people, to the Tongan history. That makes me so happy. I could die tomorrow.
The funniest?
I could die happily tomorrow.
You go to church, and everyone is going to stand up and do a malanga. And this person, this one is going to tell a good story. And then this one, so boring. He's not going to tell a story. So it's just like,
The power of a story.